So now, as today marks exactly 1 month since the conflict in Gaza began, following terror group Hamas's horrific attacks in Israel, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned the besieged territory is becoming a graveyard for children.
It follows intensified Israeli airstrikes over recent days, with the Gaza Health Ministry confirming more than 10,000 Palestinian deaths since the start of the war. Well, joining us now from Washington is Jim Townsend, former Deputy Secretary of Defence for Europe under Obama and Biden. Jim, good morning. Thanks for joining us on Talk today. We've seen Antony Blinken's visit this week. What are the American people's expectations of his handling of this conflict?
Well, increasingly, the expectations across the U.S. is that they want the president to push hard for some type of ceasefire, some type of pause. I think the loss of life in Gaza, as well as in Israel, there's graveyards on both sides, has really struck a chord in the United States. It's caused a bit of a convulsion among the American people about our whole policy towards Israel, towards the Middle East, and that's a lot of pressure on the president to do something about it.
Jim, how much power does an American president wield in these kind of problems? They obviously, very much central to global events are the United States. There was a clip the other day, I think at the weekend, I'm sure you saw it, of Obama saying, I wish I could have done more when I was in power. I mean, he was there for a heck of a long time. You were around at that time, Jim. What are the limitations or what are the possibilities when you sit in that big seat in the Oval Office when it comes to the Middle East, Israel and Gaza?
Well, the Obama discussion that he had on television a couple of days ago was tremendous. I watched that just transfixed as you could see him grappling with what could have been, what should he have done. And that's the problem. The president of the United States can have a lot of influence on what our policy development is, what the goals for the U.S. might be, and who he's going to send out to try to bring these goals to fruition. But particularly when it comes to the Middle East, as much leverage as you will with Israel in terms of assistance we've given to Israel, that leverage doesn't account for much. Certainly in a time like this, where the emotions are so high, the humanitarian consequences so bleak, and the determination there in Tel Aviv to press home the attack. There's not a lot that a president or a secretary of state can do when the emotions run so high as they run now. No matter if you're the president of the United States, some things are even above your ability to control or to try to manipulate. But they're trying to manage it as best they can. They don't have a lot to show for it.
And Jim, Washington has made, though, the unusual move to announce that they have stationed a nuclear missile submarine in their area of responsibility, I believe it's called, within the region. Is that a message to Iran for things not to, well, in an attempt for things not to escalate?
That's especially the reason that submarine is there. At least that's the reason it was publicized that it was there. It's not unusual for a submarine to be part of a carrier battle group. It's not unusual for those to be operating along with a fleet of that type. What is unusual is announcing that it's there. These ships, these boats, as they're called, actually, are used primarily to fire off Tomahawk cruise missiles. This type of boat in this type of scenario here. This isn't there for a nuclear mission. This is there to be able to bring firepower on land if that's what's needed. But that symbolism can run bigger than just the detail of what that submarine can do. So you're absolutely right in publicizing it and bringing the idea that there's a nuclear aspect to this. This is a pretty big signal to Iran to stay out of this and make sure your Hezbollah and other militias stay out of it as well, particularly attacking U.S. forces that might be in Syria or in northern Iraq.
Jim, you know better than most, being in the Defense Department for the time you were there. Eyes are never off fully the Middle East and this region and the Israel-Gaza story. But of course, what happened on October 7th was a huge game changer. This has the rules of engagement have recalibrated, as it were. It's hard to see how this story ends. What is your assessment of what happens, Jim?
Well, I think we here in Washington in the United States, we've certainly learned some lessons from Iraq. We've learned lessons from combating ISIS. The fighting in Mosul in northern Iraq, as Iraqi troops advised by the U.S. and other nations, faced a horrible fight in Mosul. It took a long time and it was bloody. And Mosul is nothing when compared to Gaza and how Hamas has tunneled Gaza City and is certainly better prepared than the ISIS fighters were in Mosul. So when you look at that experience, I think the future number of months is going to be bloody. It's going to be something where civilians will be caught in the crossfire. It's going to be something that's going to break our hearts as we see this offensive continue onwards, as they try to crush, as Israel tries to crush Hamas. And it's going to come at a great cost to the Israelis as well, Israeli forces, but particularly the civilians are going to be caught in it. And that is why it is so important for us to work out some type of humanitarian pause, something to get the civilians out of there and to get humanitarian assistance in there. I know the Secretary of State's trying, but like we've said earlier, there's not a whole lot you can do in terms of leverage to bring about something like a humanitarian pause, not at this stage.
And Jim, just to ask you about something that's happening a little closer to home, to you certainly, at the moment. Donald Trump repeatedly clashing with a judge defending his family's business as he testified in a civil fraud court in New York yesterday. Can I get your comments on that? Any thoughts?
Well, it's embarrassing to have to talk about this. It's something that it was a clown show, as we say. It was a campaign rally. It was Donald Trump doing what he does, but in a courtroom instead of a big rally area. He was facing a judge and he was facing a situation where if you lie, you get in trouble for that. And we know that during rallies and that type of thing, Donald Trump tends to exaggerate, to be mild about it. So he was in this situation there in a courtroom, carrying on and making a fool of himself in front of the judge that will be deciding his sentence in terms of the fraud findings in this one particular case. He has a number of cases in the U.S. right now against him. And so I think this shows us how he looks on institutions that are so important, like the legal system. But it also shows what the 4 years could look like should he be elected. We will find more of this grandstanding and this making a mockery of institutions like the presidency. So it's a reminder, I think, to a lot of voters of what they need to be aware of as they go to the polling booth next year. And so I hope this is certainly something in the forefront of everyone's minds, but there are many in the U.S. who don't care about that. They want Donald Trump no matter what he does in the courtroom. And so this is it's gonna present to the United States a very close election as we look at the next year.
Well, Jim Townsend, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's Jim Townsend, former Deputy Secretary of Defence for Europe.